What's going on, guys? Thanks for listening in on the Redshirts podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lassiter. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Week 0 college football matchup between the number 8 ranked Florida Gators versus the Miami Hurricanes. Uh, this game takes place August 24th at 7 o'clock in Orlando. Um, there's a lot of key things going into this game. Florida and Miami are a rivalry that really was at its peak in the 90s and early 2000s. We had a lot of classic matchups then. Um, the most recent matchup was 2013, which Miami took the victory on. And Miami has won 8 out of the last 10 matchups between these two teams. So there's a lot of bragging rights, on the line in this game. Um, Florida obviously coming off of a way better season as they went 10-3 under their first year with Dan Mullen at head coach, and Miami was on the opposite end of that spectrum. Their last season with Mark Richt, disappointing 7-6 season with that disappointing loss to Wisconsin in the bowl game. Uh, New head coach Manny Diaz comes in, never been a head coach, but shows a lot of potential in coaching, head coaching that is. Um, Florida's going to have returning quarterback Felipe Franks, who in his freshman year he threw for 1,438 yards, which isn't great at all, with only 9 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. So just barely ratio of over one. Um, Year two, his first year under Dan Mullen, who's obviously an offense guru known for developing quarterbacks, throwing for 2,457 yards, so throwing for 1,000 more yards than he did his freshman year. 24 touchdowns and six interceptions, along with 6 rushing touchdowns. So he finished the year with 30 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, which isn't out of this world, but compared to his first season, it's out of this world. And people expect to see another big step from Franks this year with another offseason working with Mullen and that offense. Um, Miami, on the other hand, last year's leading passer was the N'Kosi Perry, who only threw for 1,000 yards, 1,091 yards, 13 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So a better ratio than first year Felipe Franks had. But Manny Diaz hit us with a swerve, naming Jaron Williams, the redshirt freshman, as the starting quarterback. And last year, not a big sample size, throwing 3 passes, completing one for 17 yards. But the kid was a highly touted prospect coming out of high school, recruited by Florida, recruited by Mississippi State when Dan Mullen was there, but ultimately chose Miami. So there's a lot of promise for him. He's a great pocket passer, but also has the ability to extend plays with his legs. So it's going to be an exciting matchup, and seeing how Jaron plays in his first really big game on the college football scene. I would expect to see Tate Martell and N'Kosi Perry in this matchup at some point through the game, because that Florida defense might be a little rough for Jaron Williams. I'm not saying that he can't play the whole game. I'm saying expect to see the other two quarterbacks, who are both two other talented players. And Tate Martell sees that field, he might try and show out, prove that he deserves that job after transferring from Ohio State. Now, Florida's leading rusher last year was one Michael Pirine, who had 826 rushing yards and 7 TDs, which isn't outstanding, but he split his carries 50-50 with Jordan Scarlett, who's now gone to the NFL. This year, I expect, even with our deep running back group with Malik Davis, Damian Pierce, and Michael Pirine, I expect Michael Pirine to probably get more like 65% of the carries throughout the year, and I expect him to break over 1,000. And Felipe Franks also rushed for 7 TDs last year, so you have two people who in the red zone can really get it done on the ground. Miami, on the other hand, leading rusher last year was Travis Homer, who had 985 rushing yards, which, again, it's not big eye-popping numbers, but they're serviceable numbers for a running back. Had 4 touchdowns, but unfortunately for Miami, he's gone to the NFL. Their leading return back is DJ DJ Dallas, who had 676, 617 yards. I'm sorry, with 6 TDs, and I expect to see those numbers jump really high this year. He's a really talented running back, but kind of unproven in the big stage. Still has a lot uh, to be lot left unseen. So we'll see how he comes out and plays. Florida's leading receiver last year was Van Jefferson with only 503 yards, 6 touchdowns. But man, those numbers don't tell you anything. Van Jefferson is a special talent. It's just Dan Mullen really knows how to get Felipe Franks to spread the ball. I mean, Florida has one of the deepest, if not the second deepest, receiving core in the country, not just the SEC, but obviously followed by or behind Alabama. You have Van Jefferson, Travion Grimes, Kadarius Toney, Tyree Cleveland, Freddie Swain, Josh Hammond, and you'll also have Jacob Copeland this year, who's a real playmaker, which I'm excited to see play. So Florida's really deep at that receiver slot or receiver position, which Miami's DBs will be have their work cut out for them. I do believe in this game. Uh, Now, the same can be said for Miami. Their leading receiver last year, Jeff Thomas, 563 yards and 3 touchdowns. Miami, they didn't air it out a lot, but when they did, they kind of spread it out pretty well. Miami runs a nice little offense of not relying too heavily on one receiver. But I do expect Jeff Thomas to have a monster year this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had a monster game, depending on, you know, how Dan Mullen or Todd Grantham has the schemes going up with Marco or um, C.J. Henderson mirroring Jeff Thomas. He is a stud. Um, our leading tackler last year was Voshawn Joseph for Florida, 93 tackles, but he's gone to the Buffalo Bills. Florida will not have him to kind of be the main tackler on the defense. Returning tackle leader was David Reese. Um, this man missed the first 4 games of the season, didn't come back till the Tennessee game. Still put up big numbers. He is really the quarterback of that defense, a great leader. Expected him to have a fantastic senior year. Sack leader last year was Ja'Kai Polite for the Florida Gators. Had 11 sacks, but unfortunately for the Gators, he is with the New York Jets now. Returning, however, is someone last year who thought was going to be the guy last year that would have the monster season instead of Ja'Kai Polite. Jabari Zuniga is a freak of nature. He had 6.5 sacks last year, but I expect that to be doubled this year. Yes, doubled. I'm predicting like 13 sacks on the year for Jabari Zuniga. Absolute stud lining up on that weak side last year. Expect him to wreak havoc in the backfield this year. For Miami, their leading tackler, Jaquan Johnson, unfortunately for Miami, has gone on to the NFL. The returning tackler though, is one Shaquille Quarterman, and this man is all over the field. Fantastic defender for Miami. Expect him to have a lot of big plays and kind of be the captain of this defense moving forward. Their sack leader last year was Joe Jackson, who had 9. Unfortunately for Miami, he is also headed and gone to the NFL. Their returning sack leader would be, it was tied. 2 players had 6 sacks last year. So as you can see, their defensive line can wreak havoc in that backfield with 3 players over 6 sacks. It's ridiculous. They're the leading interception, the leading man with the most interceptions on each team last year. Last year for the Florida Gators, it was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who had 5. Unfortunately for Florida, he is on the Saints now. But Florida is really deep at the DB position, even with a couple injuries going into the season. The returning interception leader for the Florida Gators this year would be C.J. Henderson and Brad Stewart, both with only 2. But Marco Wilson coming back off that torn ACL I expect Amari Burney to play that kind of star position along with Trey Dean every now and again, and I could easily see them coming up with 3 picks this year apiece. So Florida really deep at the corner position, not so much at the safety. You do have Donovan Steiner along with Brad Stewart, who Brad Stewart's such an underrated talent. I expect him to make a lot of big plays this year. Um, then for the Miami Hurricanes, Mr. Redwine, who had 3 last year, but gone to the NFL, unfortunately, for the Miami Hurricanes. Their returning interception leader would be Trahan Bandy, who also had 3. And this kid, man, he's locked down. He can really he can guard any receiver in the ACC. We'll see how he does against them SEC receivers this year. The big, tall one, probably Trayvon Grimes will get most of his coverage. So a couple big points for each team. To start off, I'm gonna start off with Florida. Some key things that we need to look at that can really affect this game. Felipe Frank's progression. Like I said, Dan Mullen, quarterback guru, really knows how to develop these quarterbacks when he gets there and just turn them into absolute studs. I mean, if you just look at the past quarterbacks he's dealt with, Tim Tebow, Dak Prescott, Nick Fitzgerald, which he turned all of them into such studs, and they were all really similar players to Felipe Franks, big with big arms, but can also run the ball. So we should see some development on Felipe Franks, and if he takes that next step forward, Heisman contender. Next, we'll have to focus on Marco Wilson's return last year in the Kentucky game, tore his ACL, I believe, missed the entire season. I think maybe he was ready for the bowl game, but Dan Mullen sat him down and didn't play him in the bowl game, and now he's back. Believe it or not, Marco Wilson joins 3 other corners in University of Florida history to start as true freshmen in opening game. This man right here is just as good, if not better, than CJ Henderson. And you will have 2 of the top 5 DBs in the country, and you can at me. Florida will have the best duo corners in the country. And just seeing his return and see how it helps the defense, allowing Trey Dean to step into that star position and just really adds one more piece to that already elite defense that Florida has. Another thing to go back onto Felipe Franks is that hot ending he had last year. The last 4 games, I mean, Felipe Franks looked like an absolute monster. Started second half of that South Carolina game and the comeback against South Carolina. Then the next week against Idaho, which it's Idaho, but just really seeing the improvements he made after those couple big losses to Georgia and Kentucky, then the Florida State game, and then obviously the Michigan game, where no one had us winning, and we came out on top. So just seeing how, if that hot ending Felipe had carries over into this year. And then, O-line. It's time to talk about the O-line for Florida. Been watching a lot of press conferences with Dan Mullen, and he seems confident that the O-line can handle Miami as long as there's no injuries. But, college football injuries happen, and we are very young and unexperienced at that O-line position. In an injury, we can see true freshmen playing the rest of that game. So we really have to look and see how that O-line is going to hold up. First of all, with the starters, and if someone goes down, see if those young guys can step up and fill the role and play on that elite college football level. Another thing for Florida that can be really key is the receiver depth for the university. Just so deep at that position, seeing how well we spread it out. Kadarius Toney got the prestigious number 1 for Florida along with CJ Henderson. So many people say that since he got that, Dan Mullen has some more big things in the playbook for him, kind of Percy Harvin-esque type plays for him, plays centered around him to really let him shine and do all these things he can do. And one I'm going to do one player I am most excited for each team, and the Florida Gator I am most excited for is Amari Burney. Um, I've watched his high school tape, and he is an absolute stud. Can play safety, can play linebacker, can play that star position. I'm just excited to see him fill depth anywhere that needs it, and just see him on the field this year. Um, then my player of the game predictions, I have Felipe Franks coming in and just showing that next step of progression for the Florida Gators. On to Miami. Um, some big points. Transfer you. Isn't that what they say? Transfer you. Seeing how those transfers Miami pulled in comes into play. As we've seen, Tate Martell did not get the starting job, but that doesn't mean we won't see him at quarterback. I believe he probably will wind up finishing the game at quarterback. And if not, we've seen a lot of reports that he might be moving to slot receiver, so maybe even expect him to see time at slot. And just all those other transfers they got and see how they get in. Then another big point, Manny Diaz. First time head coach, but I mean, hearing Dan Mullen's press conferences, he has nothing but high praise for Manny Diaz, and I'm excited to see how he does as a head coach and what kind of attitude Miami brings because of him. And then finally, their linebacking core. I personally believe Miami has the best linebacking core in the country. So it really, the game might depend on how those running backs can hit the gaps and stop the run game with Ryan Pierce, and uh, also as well as dropping back into coverage, playing some zone coverage at the linebacker position because they are very versatile. They can disrupt you in the backfield or in the passing game. So that's something Miami's going to have to use to their advantage to win this football game. Um, my Miami player of the game, I predict is DJ Dallas DJ Dallas / Robert Burns, the freshman running back, because last year Florida struggled with stopping the run, and I just think we got better at the D line even with the loss of Ja'Kai Polite with Jonathan Grenard coming in, and so we'll see how Florida's D line can hold up, but I predict that Miami running backs of all the Miami players will have the biggest of games. And my final prediction, I have the University of Florida beating the Miami Hurricanes 34-21. And I genuinely believe that this is the year Florida is back. Thank you for watching the Redshirts podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Laster. Peace.